Can you still hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, sir.
Okay, we can hear you. James, thank you for joining us, and we're going to turn it over to you now, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Laptop audio isn't the best, so I called in via phone. But it sounds like that we're on, and I hope everybody can see my slide presentation at the moment. My name is James Wood. I'm with True North Geographic Technologies. We are currently the spatial interface provider for the state of Tennessee and have been for quite some while. Most of you know me and know what we do, but just as a quick recap for those who may not, we are responsible for aggregating all of the GIS data across the state, running that through QA, and sending the districts back reports on the discrepancies that we find in the GIS data. We then aggregate that into a statewide data product and hand that off to our current EZNet provider, our current NG Core Services provider, AT&T and Intrado. And what we want to talk about today are some of the things that we've run into switching to the nationwide EZNet in the GIS data that we need to make everyone aware of. And some are going to have more priority than others. Some are just kind of a heads up for now because we're still turning on some pieces of this puzzle. And some others are for an FYI for what's coming down the road. But this is going to be kind of a general state of Tennessee GIS update for where we are right now and what's coming. And I'll have a Q&A at the end, but please feel free, if you see something and have a question, feel free to interrupt me at that time, and we can talk about it or decide if we want to take that offline or hold it to the end. So what we're going to go through is look at the GIS data standards. The last Emergency Communications Board meeting, it was voted that we should add in some new layers that are a part of this new provisioning system, part of the new NGCS. So I've made those revisions, and I want to take a brief look at those. We'll look at the new standard number, and that will be out on the TECB website as a link, hopefully soon. I've sent that to them, but this week, so that may take a little time. If you need one now, you can contact me, and my contact information will be at the end of this presentation, and I'll be happy to send you a copy. We're also going to look at some of the reports. We're still doing reports by email, but we've also set up a sort of a hosted location online. It's a box location. In your reporting emails, you get a link to this. So every time you get a report from us, that link is there, and you can click on that, and that should be available to everyone. And I want to just kind of review that. We've had some turnover that I'm aware of, and may have some new folks that are attending this. And so I want to just take the opportunity to kind of go through that setup again and highlight some of the things that you see there and kind of how to navigate that. And then we're also going to look at some of the other provisioning requirements, and these are mostly coming from Intrado for their piece of this NG implementation that we just need to make you aware of. And so let's start with the standard. We're just going to take a quick look at this. This is the frontispiece, and you can tell that we're now at version 7.3.3, and you can see the date was just the other day was the last time that I made a small edit, and then sent that to the board. So if you have something prior to this, a lower version number, or if you have something that looks different, we're asking you to ditch that, put that in the circular file, and let's get you a new one to go off of. There's been several changes, and the modeling specification section has been changed because I have inserted the new section, which is about emergency services boundaries before that. So the modeling specification was section 4, but it's now section 5. So it's a very brief section that I've added, emergency service boundaries. There can be multiple emergency service boundaries, but these are necessary for the core services functions. And we've been asked to start providing those. And so it hasn't been a part of our standard fare. Up until this point, it's just been site address points, road center lines, and the ESN polygons. But now we're getting more into a more I3 compatible implementation. So what we do at True North is take the ESN boundaries and actually convert those to several different things. We take them and put them in as a provisioning boundary. So we dissolve all of those boundaries, and that creates our provisioning boundary. And we are having to make a few adjustments so that we are contiguous with the state of Virginia. And particularly right now, I'm working with the state of North Carolina so that we edge match with their provisioning boundary, because we're all on the nationwide ESINet. So we're taking care of the statewide provisioning boundary. We're also taking the ESNs and creating PSAP, primary PSAP boundaries. We do have some of the secondary PSAPs, but we can take the ESNs because we have the PSAP ID as an attribute and dissolve those and create the PSAP boundaries. What we'll be doing is providing those back to the districts to kind of get an okay check mark. But we feel like that those are going to be fairly accurate. We may need to make a few tweaks, but we also want you to have those as a feature class for yourself as well. So we'll be doing that in the near future. And as we turn different PSAPs up, we want to make sure that the boundaries are correct, because those do influence call routing in the core services functions. But one of the things that we can't create from the data that you're already sending us are these emergency service boundaries. And right now, our core services provider can only take the 3 that you see on your screen: law enforcement, the fire department boundaries, and the EMS boundaries. There are several emergency service boundaries that you could create all the way down to like dog catcher zones, animal control zones, things of that nature. But right now, these are the primary ones that that we're being asked for. And we have a workaround right now for loading those in, but we want everyone to be aware that these are going to be important layers, and that they will be required as we go forward. I haven't plugged in a whole lot of information in the document because what we want to do is follow the NENA GIS data model when it comes to these layers. And so no matter what emergency service boundary layer that you create, you have a static schema. And this is what that looks like, and it's found in the NENA 006 standard. That's the GIS data model. And we're not going to delve too deeply into this schema today, but as you start to look at that, crack open the standard and look at that section that's referenced in the state standard document, and you have questions, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I'm always available, and we can walk through some of these things together. on more of a one-on-one basis. This is the section in the NINA standard in the GIS data model, and so it's a short section in and of itself. This and the schema is about all there is on the emergency service boundaries right now. You can see that it is a required layer per the NINA standard. One of the things that you will want to take note of is that some of you may want to try to maintain these in a single layer, and that's fine. I don't know that I recommend that because it's a little more difficult to handle topology when all of these are in one layer. We will need to maintain these so that there are no gaps or overlaps within these particular polygons themselves and as they relate to the other polygons. So law enforcement doesn't need to have gaps and overlaps with fire and EMS in the ESBs, nor do they need to have gaps and overlaps with your existing ESNs, nor with the PSAP boundaries that I'll send you and get the okay on and things of that nature. So everything needs to exactly match and be contiguous within their individual layers and between the layers, and certainly as they all fit together in the statewide product. So I recommend that you maintain them separately, but if you do maintain them as a single feature class, they must be separated out before you send them up to us. So on your export to the TCS transport, that needs to separate those out into the individual layers. And because we now have multiple polygons that we're requesting to be sent, we want to go ahead and formulate a static naming convention for these particular layers. So for your law enforcement polygon, we'd like for you to name that ESB_law. And so the same for fire and EMS, ESB_fire, ESB_EMS. So as those come in from all 100 districts, we'll be able to differentiate those from the ESN polygons, because right now we don't require a naming convention for the upload, but that's because we've only had 1 point, 1 line, and 1 polygon coming up in the uploads. So we were able to pick those out based on geometry rather than name. So that's a very brief overview of that. There, once again, there's the schema. There are some static values for these, just the agency IDs and the URIs, URNs. You'll want to choose carefully your display name, things of that nature. But like I said, we can go over those, and you may not be familiar with the NINA Globally Unique ID, which is kind of a new concept, and so we can talk about that on a more personal level. So let's go into reports. We're trying to move to a more online hosted environment, and so you continue to get the reporting that we can send via email with those attachments, but there's some that can get rather large, and we're afraid will break the allowed attachment size for some folks, and we've tried to be careful with naming the extensions and things like that to not cause our emails to get blacklisted, so that you're getting those. But we feel like that moving in this direction is probably a better way to go. And so I just kind of want to go through this. We're doing this in tandem. You will continue to get reporting emails, so nothing is going to change on that end. This has been out there actually for quite some time. But I just want to highlight the hosted box solution here, if you're not familiar with that, or just to let you know that it's out there. So when you click on your link, and I'm using Robertson as an example here, you have two folders at the root, reports and something called distributable. And if you drill down into the distributable folder, you eventually get to your GIS data deliverable for your specific district and the surrounding districts. That's where those are housed. And so I know that a lot of you download those surrounding counties or surrounding districts to use either in dispatch or for your editing. And so that's where those are found. The reports folder, if we go in there, you'll find the exact same attachments that you find on your email. And then you also get the folder is called the centerline geocode distance. Some of you may be more familiar with that as a fishbone analysis, and we'll look at that in just a second. But these get updated and usually as you go into this folder, they will show up in the order in which they were added to the folder the night that you process through QA. So the first thing that you want to do here is click on this name field header so that it sorts everything alphabetically. And then when you do that, you can see that things are kind of grouped. And so we've got an ESN error report, the attribute error report for the road center line, and a duplicate ORID report as well. But those reports will be grouped. And individually, you have the CSV that we've always had. It opens natively as a table in ArcGIS, so that works nicely. And you have the ORID that you can use to join to your layers to find that. It's also nice because you can open that natively in an Excel spreadsheet. And I know there's a lot of folks that handle these that way as well. So that's out there. But then you also have the .gis file, and really that's an extension that's just renamed from .zip, and that is because a lot of the emails will block a zip attachment as malicious. So we just rename that .zip to .gis. Most compression software will see that natively as a compressed file, but you can download that and rename that to .zip. And what's in there is the shape file. So you can load that into any GIS software that will support shapefile, and most do, and actually visually see where your errors are, along with the attributes that are associated to that. It's the same attributes that you would see in the CSV. So it shows you what the source attribution is and then what the error message is. But so there is those companion files are there for each report. And then we have this centerline geocode distance folder, and if I go in there, I get the actual zip file that you can download, and we haven't renamed it because a lot of those are too big to send over email. So this is the only place that this fishbone analysis is being stored. This is the only place that you can get to that. But these reports have been going out for some time, and that analysis runs now every Saturday. So over the weekend, when you come back in Monday, or if you choose to work on the weekend, it's there starting Sunday, I believe. I believe this runs Saturday afternoon. So I would encourage you to go and look at this. What this geocode distance report is a geocode of your site address points back to your road center lines. And so it's really a relationship between your address points and the road center line segments to show you, do you have your site address points lined up on the correct segments, or do the segments need some adjustment as far as their address ranges or maybe their ESNs? Things didn't geocode exactly where they should have in relation to where the site address point is actually located. So this is a good tool. It's not an alley match, but because we've been working on our site address points pretty rigorously so that they can become the alley in our past life, the site address points are kind of our de facto. And so when we take those and geocode them to the road center line, it reveals some things about how those line up. I just wanted to point out real quick that this is kind of our breadcrumb trail as you dig in. And if I want to back out to the reports folder, all I need to do is take my mouse and click on the reports, or I can also click on Robertson to get back out to my root folder as well. But here's what that geocode distance looks like, and you can see where one end of the line is at the site address point, and the other end is where that geocoded based on the road segment. And the road segments may be broken, and there may be duplicate addresses and within the address ranges, or maybe an ESN was plugged in for the wrong left or right ESN on the segment. We've seen multiples of those, and so, but it's easy to load this up and take a quick look at where some of the trouble spots are that you need to focus on. And so while we're talking about road center lines, the road center lines are now what Intrado is using as their guide. They are not focused on the site address points as we have been. And so I've been pleasantly surprised as we've been checking against the alley, doing alley geocodes against the road center lines, that you guys at large have been keeping your road center lines pretty clean. We've been getting well into the 90s percentile. A lot of folks are 97, 98%. Some folks are almost 100% on those threshold requirements. So to date, we've had really good results on the road center lines. So don't think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the road center lines. But I do want to highlight a few things, and all of these tie back to the road center lines and not necessarily the address points. Of course, if we make a change, if we find something in the road center lines that is also reflected in the site address points, we want to make sure that both feature classes are being adjusted, whether that's attribution or geometry. So the first thing that ties in with the fishbone analysis is address range overlaps, and there are a few. So I want to kind of go through a couple of examples of what constitutes an error and what is actually okay. And so I've just grabbed a couple of screenshots, and I hope you can see okay. The segments that are highlighted, it's light blue. There's a segment at the top of this interchange and a segment at the bottom. And so what a lot of the address range overlaps that I'm finding have to do with situations like this, where there's kind of a break. The road going north-south has a section along that interchange that doesn't have any addressing. And so that can be zeroed out or blank. And oftentimes we kind of zero in on the individual segments and forget that there's road addresses that are on the other side that we need to compensate for. And so if I'm running from south to north with my address ranges, this is my two left and right two addresses on this segment before I get to the interchange. So 98 and 99 is where those address ranges end. But what I might accidentally do as I'm plugging in information above the interchange is start with those same addresses in my left and right from. But what that creates is an address range overlap. And so this is pegged as an error. And so this may, as far as call routing is concerned, as long as this is within the same PSAP, it's going to call route to the correct PSAP. But if there is a division between response areas here, then that can make or break where the call gets routed to. So we want to start checking for things like this, and we are going to be sending, as we're going through and working with Intrado and AT&T on these on turning up the PSAPs, we're running through these analysis, and we'll be sending these things back to you. This is another example where we've got a ramp, and I hope you can see the highlighted segments here. On the north side, there's a ramp, and also on the south side, there's a ramp, but there aren't any address ranges, so I've zeroed these out. But that's actually okay. But because ramp is in the name, and it's in the same ESN, and it's in the same IMSAG community name, and the address ranges are all zeroed out, this comes back as an address range overlap. I have an exception code that I can plug in when I'm provisioning data to the core services to allow address range overlaps to go through. So these are not being prevented from being provisioned into the system. But if they weren't, this would not be a deal breaker. There's never going to be an address on a ramp, and there is never going to be anything call routed off of the centerline geometry when it comes to a ramp. So, but these are going to come back as errors. We are in the process of weeding these out before we send you information back on these address range overlaps, so that you don't have to do that. So you don't have to weed through all the ramps and all of the crossovers and things like that. So these are okay. This, however, is not. And I've seen a few of these where we've got an address range and it starts with 0. So if you have an address range that starts that low, you really need to start with 1 and 2, not 0. Because if I do this on multiple occasions, I might run into a situation where I create an address range overlap accidentally, much like the 98-99 scenario. When I plug in 0 as a part of my address range, unless that side of the street segment is 0 all the way, or both sides are 0 all the way, I really need to start that with an integer. So we'll be sending you a few of these back as we find them. So another thing that is happening is that there's a Geo IMSAG that's going to be built off of the street center line eventually. And so we want to start standardizing. And I know for some of you that's not possible because of the way that your dispatch mapping information is processing incoming 911 calls. We have implemented some code in our QA and in our export to the NGCS that we are going to start standardizing the abbreviations. And the two that are at issue are the AT&T Southeast Thoroughfare, which are kind of some of the legacy alley street type abbreviations, and the USPS Publication 28 types that are in the state standard. They are mandated by the state standard. And you're familiar with some of these, and this is just a small example. AV in AT&T Southeast Thoroughfare is AVE in the Publication 28. So we want to, if you are in a position where you can start migrating away from the Southeast Thoroughfare abbreviations to the Pub 28, we want you to start doing that. If you are limited by your dispatch vendor software right now, that's okay. We are taking the step to standardize the types and sending those, provisioning those up to the core services for you. And then when you go live or when you get turned up, then we can work with you to take your GIS data to what you'll be seeing in the alley. This is just a heads up. I don't want anybody to worry about this. This has kind of been looming on the horizon for a while. We've had a few test runs where a couple of districts have tried to make the change and it didn't work, so they went back to the Southeast Thoroughfare abbreviations. We can work this out, but I just wanted to put this out there as kind of a heads up that we are now standardizing your data when we send it to AT&T and Intrado, and eventually we will want those Pub 28 legacy abbreviation types in your GIS data so that it is it's all copacetic, right? All the geo MSAG and the core services matches what is in your GIS data. That's really the goal. And if you're curious about some of the others, there is an Appendix A in the standard that lists all of the abbreviations that are Pub 28 standard. And we've seen a mix of Pub 28 and Southeast Thoroughfare in the same GIS data. So you might want to start looking at that and making plans accordingly. And again, I'm available, myself or the True North support staff are available to talk with you about migrating if you have any questions about that.
Hey, James.
Yes.
This is Justin Whipple. We've got one comment and one question. Ernie Qualls mentioned that Nina is working on ways to name ramps, and there may be an address on a ramp at some point. And then his question was, when will we be going to NG data with type names being spelled out? Okay, yeah. So anytime that you have a street segment that doesn't have address ranges right now, and you have an address that is plugged onto that street segment, then you would modify your address ranges accordingly. So you would no longer have zeroed out address ranges on those. And the code that we're plugging in to weed out those would apply in like manner. It would not weed that out at that point if there was an address then on a ramp. So you would, if there was a discrepancy there, you would get that back if you started plugging in address ranges on your ramps. There is no timeline on moving to a full implementation of the NINA GIS data model, or to a schema that accommodates spelling everything out. The GIS, there is a GIS committee that has taken that up and is looking at those things, the ramifications for everybody within the state and at the provisioning level as well, and how that we would best tackle that. But right now, it's status quo. The state schema standard still stands, and Entrado will be using the USPS Publication 28 abbreviations as we go forward.
All right, we got another question here. When filling out the to and from attributes on center lines, are we to still go by actual address points or an estimate on some that have space before you get to a point? I.e., the left side might have the first address point at 1, but the right side, the first address point is 50. Would we put the right side as 2 or 50?
Yeah, I would go with as close to actual address ranges as possible. Using the site address points gave us ground truth, but going with the road center lines, we now have a potential for including addresses that don't actually exist if we aren't careful with our address range information. So if you have 1 on one side and 50 on the other, that's how I would start my address ranges on those respective sides of that segment. Okay. So one of the other things that we're looking at or finding in the data, and this was kind of a surprise, is multi-part geometry in the road center lines. And here's an example of that. If the highlighted center line segment here, if I select any one of these segments, I get all of that selected. And obviously you can't digitize that way. It's multiple segments. However, they've been joined as a multi-part feature. What we usually see with multi-part geometry is like in the ESNs, where you have a particular ESN number that has a corridor between it, and there is no physical connection between those two geometry parts. And so they're joined together in a multi-part geometry and show up as one record, one attribute in the table. But for the road center lines, we don't need multi-part geometry, and that is more a requirement of the Entrado provisioning than anything else, and that's why we haven't really captured that before now. So we'll be finding some of the multi-part geometry features and sending those back for you to take a look at and correct. Any questions about that? So the other thing that we're seeing here as well are self-intersections. And there's a couple of different definitions about what a self-intersection is. And I'm just going to show you some examples of what is and what is not a self-intersection, and what is okay and what's not. And they mostly have to do with like cul-de-sacs or circles, things like what you're seeing on your screen right now. And the way this has been digitized is actually okay. So we've got nodes at these locations where the red circles are. The first segment coming off of the street intersection on the left comes in and then breaks. And then there's a segment that goes on the right-hand side of the circle and a segment that goes back around and connects
on the left-hand side. This is perfectly fine, and you've got addresses on both sides of the street, so you would put your address ranges accordingly based on your address points. So this is okay, and this passes through the provisioning. This is another way to do that, and you can see that we've got just one location here where the street comes up and breaks, and then the entire circle is one segment, but it comes back and connects. But we have basically two nodes there that are connecting, that separate the circle from the ingress and egress. This is also okay. Where we're having some problems provisioning some segments is when something is digitized like this. And this is actually not, so if I run a check in my Esri software to find a self-intersection, this does not come back. So this does not meet the Esri definition for a self-intersection, but it does meet the definition for the Open Geospatial Consortium. And some of the tools are finding these types as self-intersections, and these are being blocked. So you can see there is a start node at the street, and there is one end node, and it comes back around, and it might connect to that line. It might connect to an edge, or it might connect to a vertex. But it's a start and an end node for this entire segment. So these are not being provisioned currently, and we're working with some really good folks at Intrado to try to figure out what we need to do on these. We're also looking at some code that would modify this slightly to allow it to go through the provisioning process without us having to go in and manually change these. So we're looking at this. I don't want you to rush back home and try to dig through your data and find all of these. We may have a programmatic solution that we can work through. If you stumble across one of these that's already been digitized, go ahead and fix it. Just break it at that node that's inside that red circle, and make those two segments instead of one. And obviously, any addressing you would need to adjust in the address ranges. If you digitize anything going forward, this is probably the best way to do that. Or if you've got some odd addresses on either side of the circle, then you can break it wherever you need to be inclusive of those addresses. But having just a to and from node, as in this example, is kind of breaking the bank when we try to provision these in. And of course, we want these to go through because a lot of them have addresses tied to them, and we want those to show up in the GeoMSAG so that those TNs will be validated. So it is important that these centerline segments make it through. Any questions on that? All right, well, that's all I've got for you.
All right, James, we got another question. Can you clarify on the ESB layers what polygons you were looking for? For example, my EMS has 6 districts, so I have 6 polygons that make up my EMS layer. We are the only PSAP for the whole county, so do we need 1 polygon or 6 polygons?
Right, so this is a
this is a breadcrumb trail for the telecommunicator. When a call comes in, let's say we've got a wireless call, it'll take the XY and use the GIS data to intersect with the PSAP polygon to figure out where that needs to call route to. So that goes to the PSAP, but in the same instance, it will pick up the law, fire, and EMS attributes as well to carry with that. And I'm overly generalizing all of this. So whether I land in District 1 or District 6, it's still, let's say, the county EMS. So if, as I understand it right now, and things do change as we move through this and have, as we've had discussions with Intrado. But for right now, my understanding is that I just need that one polygon to represent that county EMS.
Okay, I actually have a question for you, James. Do you foresee the schema in the site address points and the street center lines adding something to tie the ESBs into that, similar to the ESNs?
Short answer to that is no, but that's not out of the question. I think the right avenue for proceeding with that would probably be to take that up with the GIS committee and pose that as a question. Talk about the pros and cons of adding to our existing schema and having that implemented statewide, and plugging in those attributes, and then make a decision that way. But I'm not opposed to that. There's just hadn't thought about that, Justin.
All right, is there any other questions for James? I'm not seeing any right now. So James, thank you very much. The gift card winner for this session is Michael Good with Giles County. So you will get your card sent to you via email later on.